Excuse me. Are you gonna be here, like, for a
Yeah, I
while?
can watch your stuff.
Thank you.
You're
I just
welcome.
gotta run over to the Senate room and set up real quick.
Yeah, you're
so
fine. I'll watch your stuff.
I appreciate it. If
You're
anybody
welcome.
gets mad about it, tell them it's Progress Virginia. I'll be right back.
The what?
Progress Virginia. Tell them I'll be
Oh,
right
okay.
back. Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
exactly
I'm
right.
gonna say.
That's the same thing. I will.
I think it's Courts, is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is taken care of. 1782 is referred to courts. I'm going to begin with Delegate Klein's subcommittee, so Chairman Klein, if you would mind taking us through that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Start with Delegate Cole's 1537, which authorizes any member of the Armed Forces National Guard who receives military orders to relocate for a period of service of at least 90 days, to terminate certain contracts for certain services. Subcommittee recommended reporting with a substitute 8-0, and I would move the substitute.
Is there a motion to accept the substitute?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Would we please distribute that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there's a substitute before you, but it has an error on it, so I'm redistributing the substitute. This will be the correct version.
Okay, so we just moved the correct version of the substitute.
Thank you. Is the substitute adopted, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, the substitute is before us.
All right. And as substitute clarifies certain services, telecommunications, internet, television, athletic, general membership, satellite radio, alarm systems. And the recommendation of the subcommittee was to adopt the substitute 8-0, and I so move.
Okay, Delegate Cole, would you like to, I know this was heard in the subcommittee, but I want to give our patrons some opportunity to briefly just sort of share with us the raison d'etre for doing this.
Yeah, this is, thank you, Mr. Chairman, this is simply to take some of the provisions of the Federal Soldier and Sailors Relief Act and put it into the state code to allow service members who are deployed, who may have entered into some of these contracts, you know, as you know, in the service, you never know when you're going to be deployed, and would allow them to cancel services that they no longer need because of their deployment.
You have an example that took place in your district, or?
No, you know, I have heard examples from various places in the state about, you know, a service member having to be deployed overseas and signed up for a home security system, and then, of course, he's gone, so he no longer needs that, and he tries to cancel, and the home security system says, sorry, we've got a contract, we're not going to let you cancel.
Okay, so that we keep things moving expeditiously, I'm going to provide an opportunity for those in favor of the bill, 3 minutes each side. Are those in favor of the bill? Anyone want to come up and speak, or are you sufficiently happy with what's going on with this piece of legislation?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Victoria Cochran, Deputy Secretary for Public Safety and Homeland Security. We're very satisfied with this bill and support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Okay, I will assume then that all the proponents have spoken. Is there anyone against this bill that wants to speak? Seeing none, members of the committee, any questions for the patron? Hearing none, we have a motion before us we do not have a motion. Do we have a motion? Okay, if we have a motion before us to report the substitute, the corrected substitute, and the members will record their votes. Okay, the clerk will close the vote, and the bill report 16. Thank you, Delegate. Chairman Clark.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we had Delegate Herring's bill 1894 dealing with DCJS training standards, expanding the responsibilities of DCJS regarding community policing by rewording those standards and expanding them for basic training and recertification to include fair and partial policing, verbal de-escalation, needs of special populations. The bill changes the term community policing to community engaged policing. Recommendation of the subcommittee was to report and refer to appropriations 8-0, and I so move.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion duly seconded on House Bill 1894. Delegate Herring, would you like some brief moments to describe your otherwise unanimously supported bill?
Sure. This bill does enhance the training curricula for police, and it will be available to all 21,952 law enforcement officers in Virginia, and who are employed by 327 agencies and 38 training academies. It's just basically to promote the community policing process and enhance it, especially in underserved communities. And just to make a note for the committee, the statutory language for community policing has not been updated since 2001.
Okay, thank you. Again, proponent of the bill, I assume that this administration is supportive. Is there anyone opposed to this bill? Any comments from our committee? Hearing none, we have a motion to report and refer the bill to appropriations. Members will report their votes. Clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't know,
Okay,
technically challenged.
with the, probably using your camera finger like I use now. You have to press it gently. That's how it records.
The magic touch.
The gentleman from the Shenandoah Valley has properly voted, okay? All right, clerk, close the roll. The bill will report and refer 16 to nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Clark.
All right, thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Chairman. Next bill is Delegate Corey's bill, 1651, providing that an inmate sentenced to a term of imprisonment where the inmate is ineligible for release, excluding geriatric release prior to age 75, is exempt from the requirement to deposit 10% of any funds received into a personal trust account. Currently, that category is reserved for people on death row and people sentenced to life without parole. The recommendation of the subcommittee was to report 5-0, and I so move.
Okay, it's motion to report the bill, to report the bill. Is there a second?
I have your little screen up there where you can see that I'm pushing mine.
I do not. Delegate Gilbert.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask the subcommittee chairman if somebody could articulate the reasoning behind this.
Mr. Chairman, the patron is here as a member of the committee, so he can kind of explain, but I think what you're seeing is very few people receiving geriatric parole. I believe 60 in the past, well, 60 total have received geriatric parole, and that these individuals generally, if they so choose, can use the money that they receive in their inmate accounts.
Well, Mr. Chair, I guess what I'm asking is why, what is the rationale for depositing 10% of the funds into the inmate personal trust account to start with, I guess?
I'll let our.
It appears that someone has found a way to the podium to enlighten us. Could you identify yourself and further enlighten us?
Absolutely. Marie Varga, Department of Corrections. In answer to what these are, it's sort of like a forced savings account for reentry purposes, so that it comes from their own money. We take 10% out of all funds received and put it into this little tiny, kind of like a savings account, just for reentry, up to $1,000, which is fine, except if you're not going home. And it's those people who would just prefer to have their money to be able to support themselves, not be a burden on their families. But right now the code simply says you either have life or multiple life expressed in that way. These are what I call numeric life. They have way too many, they're going to be in prison forever.
Understood, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Gilbert.
So I assumed it was for reentry, but I didn't, if there was some other purpose that money was used for to offset costs, or, I mean, I know some local jails charge for weird things that maybe they should or shouldn't leave that for another day, but anyway, I just didn't know if there was another use, so it's all
It's
just
their
sort
money.
of for when they get out, here's your little nest egg, for lack of a better word.
Precisely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Delegate Corey, would you like to have a word about your piece of legislation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was about to offer that, but I am delighted that the staff is here to answer detailed questions. Delegate Klein has already explained it. It is actually a simple bill. I know, don't laugh. But it simply allows those who will never be released to have access to that 10% that they otherwise would not while they are prison.
I think we understand the bill. Okay, are there proponents of the bill? Obviously, okay, are there anybody who opposes the bill? Okay, I think we have a bill before us with a motion to report. It is unamended, as I understand. There's no financial impact. Is that correct? Right. Okay, is there any further discussion from the committee? Hearing none, the committee will vote. Okay, all the members voted. All the members voted. Clerk will close the roll. Bill report 16 to nothing. Congratulations, Delegate Ford. All right, Chairman Clacker.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next bill, Delegate Marshall's bill, House Bill 1468. It's a bill that you saw last year, prohibits Department of Corrections, Sheriff, or other official in charge of a facility from releasing an incarcerated alien for whom a lawful detainer order has been received from immigrations, except to transfer that person to another facility. The bill provides that an alien must be held in excess of his scheduled release date if federal or state law requires that they do be held until they are transferred to another federal authority. There was an amendment made to the bill to...
Do you want to have the clerk report the amendment?
Yes, that's fine.
Mr. Chair, the amendment is on page 1, line 19, after custody. We strike until transferred to an appropriate federal authority.
That amendment was adopted at subcommittee, so the recommendation of the subcommittee was to report as amended 3-2. I don't think I have to adopt an amendment here. I can just move the bill. Right, Mr. Chairman?
No, we do have to adopt the amendment. Is there a motion on the amendment?
No. Okay, I'll move the amendment.
Is there a second? Okay, there's a second. All in favor, the members say aye.
Aye.
Okay, okay, we have the bill amended before us.
And patrons here.
And did you make a motion?
I would move, yes, the subcommittee recommend reporting 3-2, and I so move.
There's a motion to report the bill as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion on this. Delegate Marshall, would you like to spend some brief time telling us about your bill?
I don't have to talk, I won't take the committee's time.
Okay. All right. The gentleman has yielded back, so to speak. Are there proponents of this bill that would like to speak? Are there opponents of this bill? We're going to limit this to 3 minutes. Okay. Good morning.
Claire Guthrie Gassiniak on behalf of the ACLU of Virginia. We've communicated both in subcommittee and to the patron that we are not in favor of this particular bill. We think it's an unnecessary message bill. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? You, sir, desiring to speak?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Kevin Maurer. I am with the Virginia Catholic Conference, representing the 2 bishops of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we oppose this bill because we believe that local authorities should have proper discretion of how to best keep their localities safe. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yes.
For the reasons stated by the other individuals who have testified, sir, on behalf of the Governor, Victoria Cochran, Deputy Secretary for Public Safety and Homeland Security, we strongly oppose this bill.
Delegate Marshall, any rebuttal?
Being in light of my bishop doing this, I may have to re-examine how much money I put in the second collection. I just would note that we last year passed this measure, albeit without the amendment that the sheriffs opposed, which I accept and gladly did. But that this administration has made it very clear that non-cooperation is going to result in sanctions or efforts from the federal government. We do not have to cooperate with the implementation of federal laws. It's our choice, and this has been the case recognized by the Supreme Court since the northern states refused to assist federal marshals to recapture runaway slaves. So we don't have to do it, but I'm suggesting in this instance we should do it. Kate Steinley's parents would have been very glad to have cooperation from the San Francisco authorities. So I urge adoption of the measure, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Marshall, for the clarity of the committee, when the amendment was adopted, I'm given to believe in a sidebar that I've had that the sheriffs are neutral on this bill.
Right, they have no problem.
Okay, that they're neutral, they have not supported or opposed this. Neutral. Okay, I just want the committee to know that so we're not confused about that at a future date. Okay, I now would ask the committee if they have any questions of the patron. Yes, Delegate Lopez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the patron.
Yes.
Delegate Marshall, do we know exactly how much this is going to increase costs for localities?
My understanding, localities, if ICE people do not come, can request compensation.
Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the promotion.
God help us.
Makes me feel good on the phone.
This is a cost that the federal government will not reimburse, and which the state is only going to pay a small fraction. In addition, this bill appears likely to prevent most of the use of post-trial programs such as home incarceration, ankle bracelets, work release, substance abuse. If this is not going to be reimbursed by the federal government, can you tell me a couple things? In round figures, what is the impact going to be on say a typical county, say Fairfax County?
What would the impact be if an individual was released that the federal government won and committed a crime in those days? Moreover, I don't see where this prohibits any drug rehabilitation or other subsequent follow-ups by any other level of government. This just says, look, even the Obama administration wanted to get possession of some individuals. The pro-immigration groups identified 2 counties, 2 jurisdictions in Virginia that were very low cooperation, and they said most jurisdictions were of minimal or moderate cooperation. So there were only, I think, 2 that were outlined in red, and this was one of these groups that is, pro-immigration in that standpoint of not coming down hard on people who violate our immigration laws. And there are only 2 jurisdictions that were fully cooperative in Virginia. That report was issued December 15th, 2016.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Marshall, right now we've got a situation where the vast majority of undocumented immigrants in the United States and in the Commonwealth of Virginia are not committing felonies. They're not committing violent crimes. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Okay, Delegate Corey, you're queued up to speak. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Marshall, I think I understand what your bill would do, and I just have a question about what prompted you to file this bill at this time. Is it only that you believe the current and new administration would seek retribution if we do not cooperate fully?
Well, I did this bill last year when it was under Mr. Obama, so this is not new. The individual who asked me to do this is Michael Carrera, Hispanic origin, member of the Manassas Park City Council. He asked me to do this last year, and to continue it this year, so I'm just honoring my promise.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Delegate Corey.
Thank you. Oh, I misunderstood you, Delegate Marshall. I thought you said that it was because you were concerned that the new administration would punish somehow if we did not fully cooperate.
That is an additional reason. It doesn't contradict my earlier reason for putting it in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Delegate Hope, and I'm going to yield Delegate Hope now, but I just would point out to the committee, we did hear this in subcommittee. I don't want to truncate discussion, so if we're adding something new, that's wonderful. Let's keep our remarks recorded here. Delegate Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to compliment the patron because this is a better bill than last year, but it's still a terrible bill. And what hasn't come forward though is how many, in the past years, if you have statistics of where a detainer has been sought and they've released the individual. Can you point to any statistics where this is an actual problem? Or is this just, as Claire said, a message bill?
No, it's not a message bill. We're
We'd
not putting stamps on this measure to Washington. A FOIA was undertaken by a Texas newspaper in late 2014, I think. And it was to Department of Homeland Security and anybody else who was going to answer questions about this. There were 2 jurisdictions in Virginia that were identified as not cooperating. It was not the same jurisdictions that this map that I found from December 2016, but it was 2 jurisdictions. And I think there were people who were charged with felonies who were being released. I don't have that right here now due to the techniques of my filing system, which are very geographic, and I don't put things in folders. I couldn't find that. But yeah, I do remember that much about it.
Mr. Chairman, I won't ask another question, but just, I know how this bill's gonna go. If the patron can have some statistics when this comes to the floor as to to actually identify the problem that we're trying to solve, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
I know the patron well, and I'm sure that when he's on the floor, he will be well steeped in facts and statistics.
With the full expectation that my colleague will vote for the measure, I will overload him with data.
Okay. All right. Hearing no other germane comments from the we have a motion to report the bill as amended, and the committee will now vote. Have all the members voted? Okay, the clerk will close the roll, and the bill reports 10 to 7. Thank you, Delegate Marshall. Okay, Chairman Clyde.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next bill, Delegate Mullins' bill, House Bill 2067, deals with the decertification of law enforcement officers convicted of certain crimes. The bill simply requires that said decertification occurs within 24 hours of notification, and requires that notification. Requires immediate decertification, but requires notification to CJSP within 48 hours of being aware of such conviction. Recommendation of the subcommittee was to report 5-0, and I so move.
Okay, there's a motion to report the bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion is duly seconded. We'll now hear briefly from the patron. Do you have anything you would like to add?
No, thank you very much, and I appreciate the
Well-trained attorney. Are there proponents who would like to come and speak in favor of the bill? Okay, again, we've heard this in subcommittee, and so please register your support accordingly.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The administration is in support of this bill.
Are there any other proponents who would care to speak? Delegate Gilbert has a question. Okay.
I was just going to change my vote.
Okay, are there opponents of the bill whom I said there may be others? Are there opponents that would like to speak? Seeing none, are there questions from the committee? Hearing none. We have a motion to report the bill, and hearing no other discussion, the committee will vote. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports 14-2. It appears that you have some work to do on your side of the aisle. Convincing colleagues to see the light of this legislation. It would be my hope that you will secure their support before it's subjected to full scrutiny on the floor of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good luck.
Mr. Chairman, the last bill, House Bill 2077, Delegate Wilt's bill, removing the
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Bob Sadler, Virginia Citizens Defense League. Philip sends his regrets. VCL strongly supports this bill. Thank you.
Okay, VCL supports the bill. Are there other proponents who would care to speak? Seeing none, I'll allow our 3 minutes. Good morning, Andrew. The floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I've had the dubious honour of having created and administered emergency shelters myself, and the last thing we wanted in those, especially when security was already established the way it would be here by the Virginia State Police, would be individuals walking around with firearms or other weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, sir. Please step forward and identify yourself.
Mr. Chairman, Keenan Hook, Department of State Police. As Mr. Goddard said, we do manage many shelters across the state, and our concern is that we would be managing those shelters in very high-stress situations where people are displaced after emergencies, and those same people, we would not be able to ensure safety in those environments where weapons were present that we could not prohibit.
Just a question, if I could.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You're representing state police on this?
Yes, I am, sir.
Okay. For someone who has a concealed carry permit, do we currently search people when they come to an emergency shelter if they're lawfully carrying a firearm and they're doing so in a concealed manner? Do we search them to do that?
Our policies and procedures, as I understand them now, Mr. Chairman, allow us to prohibit weapons at those shelters. To my knowledge, we have not had an extensive emergency shelter displacement of folks where they're going to those shelters in some time where I can tell you from practice whether we are searching people on the way in. I believe, Mr. Chairman, that in practice that is a prohibition that would be posted, and enforcement would be not necessarily as a pat down of everybody coming in.
Do you currently post and declare that a person who is, say, a concealed carry permitted person cannot enter a shelter with their firearm?
My understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that our policies now prohibit firearms at the emergency shelters, so we would expect people to be arriving at those shelters not in possession of firearms.
And is that posted at the shelter?
Not that I'm aware of, Mr. Chairman.
So if we're in a blowing hurricane and I'm huddled together with my family and we're trying to quickly get in to the shelter and I am carrying my firearm with me, would it be the policy of the state police to turn me away from that shelter?
Mr. Chairman, it would be the policy of the state police to try to deal with appropriate storage of that weapon, securing it off of the person while he is seeking refuge in that shelter.
So you would provide storage in the shelter for me to store the firearm so my family and I can come into this shelter?
In or separately from the shelter, yes, Mr. Chairman.
You'll forgive me, I'm not sure procedurally you guys have this all worked out. And it's not criticism of you, I'm just simply saying that from a procedural viewpoint, it doesn't seem to me that you've got a schema that has been well worked through. Because I can tell you there are probably many scenarios, the person who has a protective order, Delegate Gilbert I know has done a lot of work in this area, who might be concerned that someone else in that shelter has been a threat to that person. And so I just bring that up. And it seems to me that those are the kinds of scenarios, even if they're remote, that we need to truly work through.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I would say that the Department of State Police handles a wide variety of unique situations and high-stress situations on a routine basis. For instance, in that case, while I am certain we do not have a policy that speaks to two people, a respondent and a petitioner in a protective order being in the same shelter, I'm equally confident that we are very well equipped to make those decisions in that situation to say, let's relocate one of these people, the family, whoever, to a different shelter and address those situations. No policy can encompass everything that we deal with.
And just to be clear, in my mind, do you have a written policy right now that lays out in detail your position for how to deal with firearms in emergency shelters?
Mr. Chairman, we have written policies for all of our shelters across the state. I cannot quote you chapter and verse as to what it says on firearms. I can provide that information.
My legislative aide is in the back. He will introduce himself to you. Would you please bring me a copy of your policy as it existed prior to the introduction of this bill?
Mr. Chairman, I will accommodate your request, yes, sir.
And we'll be happy to make that available to the committee to also look at. Okay, all right, other opponents, I should say.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Victoria Cochran, Deputy Secretary for Public Safety and Homeland Security, on behalf of the administration and specifically at the request of the Virginia Department of Emergency Management as well, who also work closely with the state police in emergency situations, we strongly oppose the presence of guns in our emergency shelters for all the reasons previously stated. I would also point out that in those emergency shelter situations, there are very often very young children, and you do not want to have them in a chaotic environment, potentially getting access to a weapon.
Let me ask you quickly, does the governor's executive order on prohibition of firearms, in your opinion, does it cover this scenario?
Sir, that would be a legal question that I don't feel confident in answering.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I think we've heard from everyone. Are there any questions of the patron from members? Delegate Simon.
Mr. Chairman, actually, not a question for the patron. I'm going to speak to the bill at the appropriate time.
Okay, hang on for a minute. I'll come back to you. Any questions for the patron? Hearing none, Delegate Simon, for your general comments.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, two things. One, as to the scenario described by the chairman where you might have two people with a protective order, it sounds like what he's suggesting is that we ought to arm them, and then if they have a dispute inside the shelter, they can shoot it out, which I don't think is a scenario that anybody realistically thinks is a good idea, particularly as Kerry Cochran pointed out with all those young children around. And let's look at the language that we're striking from the code with this bill. The language that's being struck on line 24 and 25 says, except to the extent necessary to ensure public safety. So we're going to deprive the administration and the state police of their authority to ensure public safety. We're going to substitute the judgment of this committee for what's necessary to ensure public safety and take it away, take that discretion away from the professionals that we've hired to do that, the folks on the ground, in the scene, in the moment, and say, you don't have the discretion to determine what's necessary to ensure public safety. We're going to tell you that it's not necessary here from this committee. I think that's an unreasonable position for us to take. I think it's dangerous. I think it feeds this debate that I think we're going to continue to have over this tension between security and personal safety and liberty. And you all want guns everywhere. You think that makes us safer?
Mr. Simon.
Folks on this end, don't think that's the way to go.
Let me just correct the record. When you say things like we want guns everywhere, then you suggest that we want guns in courtrooms. I know of no one who supports that. That we want.
That's not true.
Well, I know of no one personally that supports that. The second point I would simply point out to you is in my questioning of state police, I offered some scenarios to understand the extent to which their policy covers things. I agree with you. The last thing we want is people exchanging fire anywhere. We don't want that. And part of the whole purpose of the Second Amendment is to provide some deterrent effect from people who have the fundamental constitutional individual right to possess and carry firearms. And so I would suggest to you that I agree completely with your view that we should not turn this into the Wild West. But I do think we have a legitimate debate as to where we draw the line, where someone is permitted to protect themselves even from the deterrent effect. So I appreciate your comments, but I wanted to make that very, very clear to the whole committee. And the second piece I want to emphasize is my discussions with the state police is to fully understand and vet what their actual policy does now. And that's why I also wanted it distributed to the full committee. So I appreciate the gentleman's comments, but I wanted to clarify it so everybody understands where I am. Okay, I think we've had sufficient debate on this. We have a motion to
Mr. Chairman.
support the bill. I think we're going to move on now.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Bell.
If I could ask a quick question, I don't know if anybody here can answer that or not. Has the National Guard been conferred with on this? Because an emergency service, they may in fact be called up and have a role in shelters. Just curious.
Delegate Gilbert, do you have a response? No. I'm sorry, Delegate Gilbert, do you have a response? No, Mr. Chairman. Okay. So the answer is, we don't have an answer there yet, but I'm sure that the patron will probably look into that before he goes to the board. Okay, we have a motion to report the bill.
Substitute motion?
There is a motion, it can be substituted. What's your substitute motion?
I move that we have this bill go by for the week so we can hear from the National Guard and get their position on this bill.
Okay, there's a motion to take the bill by for a week.
Second.
And it's duly seconded. I would simply say that I believe there is sufficient and reasonable time to answer this question. We frequently do that in consideration of bills, and if the patron wanted to take the bill by, once it was on the calendar, he would certainly probably be willing to do that. But it is the will of the committee, so the committee, all in favor,
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Gilbert.
I would hope that the committee would vote no on the motion.
Delegate Gilbert has represented his sentiment that we vote no on the motion. Is there, I assume the other side would like the motion to pass. And so, all in favor of taking the bill by will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, and the judgment of the chair, the noes have it. We're back to the original motion. The committee will vote.
Having trouble.
Has everybody voted, Mr. Wilkie? Oh, you're not voting yet. How do you wish to be reported? We're voting on it. Yes. He requests that he be signified that he has voted yes to this. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports 11 to 7. Delegate Klein, does that conclude your report?
It does, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, Delegate Wright is going to now do Subcommittee 1. For the record, Delegate Wright was stuck in miserable traffic at the moment in time and is glad to now be able to join us. Okay, Chairman Wright, please do your report.
First bill this morning, we have an administrative action, HB 1782.
We have taken that action already.
Okay. The first bill this morning is House Bill 1466, it's the Fowler's bill. The subcommittee recommend supporting with a substitute.
Okay, we have a substitute. Will the clerk distribute the substitute? Is there a motion on a substitute? There's a motion. It's been distributed. Okay, is there a motion on the substitute? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Substitute is before us. Delegate Wright.
Mr. Chairman, the substitute requires the clerk to send a notice of permit expiration only if the clerk has an electronic system for filing permits and capable of sending notices, and the permit holder requests such notification on his application. The bill provides that the applicant shall request but not require the applicant's email or other electronic address. The subcommittee recommends reporting the substitute 5-0, and I so move.
Okay, there's a motion to report it. Is there a second? Okay, so a motion to report the substitute. Delegate Fowler, do you have any comments with respect to your bill?
No, unless anybody needs them.
Gentlemen, you. Yes, okay. Delegate Simon, do you have a question?
Question for the patron, the subcommittee. Did you all hear from the Clerks Association? Did Chip Dix or anybody have an opinion on this bill? I was just curious.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we
Delegate Fowler?
respond to gentlemen that, yes, sir, we've worked very closely with the Clerks Association and Mr. Dix on this bill.
comments about the bill? Hearing none, there's a motion to report the substitute committee will vote. Okay, has everybody recorded their vote? Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports 17 to 2. Is that correct? 1. Okay, Chairman Wright.
Mr. Chairman, the next bill is House Bill 1792, Delegate Ferris's bill.
Chairman Wright, I have been informed by the patron that he has some additional things he would like to address, and he is requesting that it go by for the day. Committee will, is there a motion to do that? Is there a second? Second. Okay, the bill will go back. All in favor say aye. Aye. Goes back for the day. Chairman Wright.
The next bill is House Bill 1849, Delegate Gilbert, provides that a concealed handgun permit shall be of size comparable to Virginia driver's license and may be laminated or use a simple process to protect the permit. Current law requires that the permit be no larger than 2 inches wide by 3 1/4 inches long. And I might add, Mr. Chairman, that at the meeting last night, Delegate Gilbert had an example of a permit that had been laminated just by an individual, which is a very poor job had been done. And then he had an example of what the permit would look like if it was laminated properly. And the clerk's office testified, of course, and this is an example of where they agreed with it, and it's a may provision. In other words, that they are capable of doing it if they will. And the subcommittee recommended reporting 5 to 0, and I so move.
There's a motion to report the bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, anybody in support, Delegate Gilbert, would you like to speak to your bill? No, sir. Okay. Is there anybody in the audience who is in favor of the bill, who would like to speak?
Mr. Chairman, Andrew Sarah, Virginia Centre for Public Safety. As an ex-permit holder, I support this bill. It would have been much easier to keep it in my wallet from getting dog-eared if it had been laminated. And I also support the bill for the comments I made yesterday, which is this is going to cost a $3,000 machine plus 90 some odd dollars for every 100 for the tape to print these things. And as we're told, it will cost us nothing for that machine. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Step up and tell us what you do.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Bob Sadler, VCDL. VCDL supports this bill. And Mr. Chairman, just in the interest of moving things along, when you call for support, I'm just going to raise my hand and we can leave it at that.
Okay. The committee appreciates that. Okay, are there opposed to the bill? Questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Ferris.
I take offense to the chairman saying that my handgun permit had been very poorly protected.
What did he say?
I think he supports it.
I apologize. The committee knows I have a hearing as a public. And sometimes I'm grateful. Okay, we have a motion to committee will vote. Okay, clerk will close the roll. Mr. Chairman? Yes. Is there a procedural question?
Stop with the heavy handing, man.
Okay. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports 18 to nothing. Right.
Mr. Chairman, the next bill is House Bill 1852, also Delegate Gilbert's bill, and there is a line amendment that I'll ask someone to
Clerk will report the bill.
Mr. Chairman, on line 18, after 16.1-279.1, strike 18.2-60.3.
Okay, is there an amendment? Okay, all in favor of the amendment, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Item is approved. Okay, is there a motion on the bill? Is there a minute? there a second to move that forward as amended? Second? All right, the bill is duly seconded. Proponents, anyone want to speak for the bill? Okay, one indicating support, anyone against the bill? Would you like to speak, sir? And wave is working. Comment from the committee? Hearing none, the committee will vote. Okay, has everyone voted? Clerk will close the roll. Bill report 11 to 7. Okay, Chairman White.
Mr. Chairman, the next bill is House Bill 1853, Delegate Fielder's Bill, and it creates the Virginia Firearms Safety and Training for Sexual and Domestic Violence Victims Fund. The bill provides that the Department of Criminal Justice Services may distribute funds from the fund to reimburse any entity that offers a firearms safety or training course or class approved by the department free of charge to victims of domestic violence, sexual abuse, stalking, or family abuse. The bill also requires that upon the issuance of a protective order, the petitioner for the order be provided with a list of such approved courses and classes. The subcommittee recommended reporting 4-1, and I so move.
I believe this has a financial impact. Would the gentleman like to renew his motion?
Okay, I believe the appropriate motion needs to report and refer to appropriations.
Is there motion? There's a motion to report and refer to appropriations. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Delegate Gilbert, do you desire to speak? Okay, are there proponents of the bill? Are there opponents of the bill? Any of the opponents wish to speak?
Please, the chairman and the members of the committee, and completely out of order. I was having technical difficulties myself at the last bill and did want to note the administration's opposition to HB 1852 and to HB 1853.
We will duly note that.
Thank you, sir.
And about this bill,
We also do not support this bill. I'm sorry, we also do not support this bill, sir.
are there,
I have a question for the gentleman.
Delegate Gilbert?
Does the administration have is there a substantive reason that they don't support training for domestic violence victims to protect themselves, or is it a technical reason? What is the reason the administration would oppose that?
So the position of the administration on this and the previous bill is frankly that those who are under protective orders are often in emotionally volatile and difficult situations, and that while training is a fine thing, that training is available to people who wish to volunteer for it and putting it in code, who wish to have themselves trained. Putting it in code does not seem to be an appropriate action.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to follow that up. So
Yes, sir.
Is it your position, I just want to understand, is it your position that someone who is under a protective order is in such a condition that they cannot receive proper training?
Oh, I certainly think that they could, but I don't necessarily think that there is a reason to support that funding and legislate that action. There's nothing to prevent a person at any time from getting that kind of training.
Well, so you don't see a need to support the training, even though that training would be pursuant to someone actually handling a firearm in a safe condition?
I think training is always a good thing, sir.
Except in this case?
No, I think the training should be available. I don't see why the state should focus on this particular group of people to support and pay for that training.
And why not?
I think it is an individual decision whether to do it, and if people want to have the training, they should be able to get it. We're not trying to bar access to training. We just do not believe it needs to be in code to do that for this particular group of folks.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Good.
and thank you, ma'am, unless you had another question for
Thank
her.
you, sir. I'm sorry, was this for me too, sir?
No.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
So the,
I have that for you.
so just trying to read between the lines. So the administration, for all its efforts and rhetoric to combat domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, sexual abuse, family abuse, and have the government intimately involved in every
in support of having training for anyone who carries a firearm, whether it's concealed or openly. What I can't understand in this particular instance is why the code is written such that everyone with a concealed handgun permit can go online and bypass the training. And yet, we want training for these people. Why didn't I get that training? Why was I not required to get that training and instead allowed to go and tap on some computer keys and then prove my competency by hitting the right computer key?
Let me just say, in response to your description of computer keys, I have actually taken the hunter safety course and the boating safety course online that is offered through the auspices of DGIF. I found those to be very comprehensive and very good, and I think that people actually materially learn from online training. And of course, you know, we have universities that are very much engaged in online training. I don't think that the issue as to whether or not a person is sufficiently trained from an online course is a valid point, particularly when you look at the very comprehensive and excellent hunting safety course we have. I don't mean that as a criticism to you, Andrew. I'm just simply saying that as a matter of online training, I don't think that that is on trial right now.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with you entirely. Having done the training myself, I found it to be facile and aimed at a third grade level. Questions such as multiple choice, what is a magazine, a book about guns, the book that came with your gun, or the container that you put the bullets into. I find my 4-year-old could have answered that question. That didn't help me to be safe in public. I'll leave it at that.
Even though you have a consistent view about the Second Amendment, I would just like to acknowledge I think you're extraordinarily well informed. Okay, Delegate Simon, you had a comment.
Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of problems with this bill, but one of them comes on line 353, which says that upon the issuance of a preliminary protective order, the court shall provide the petitioner with a list of firearm safety courses. In other words, we want judges to say to victims of domestic violence, hey, you might want to think about getting a gun. Okay, that's the problem with this bill. The problem with this bill is you guys want to encourage, the problem with this bill is I believe it will encourage people to go out and arm themselves and introduce firearms into a situation where we know that when a firearm is present, the lethality of that situation goes up 5-fold. That's the problem with this bill. I understand the way that it's drafted is to create a little bit of a trap and a conundrum and give an opportunity to try and trip up the administration and say, oh, you guys don't really care about victims of domestic violence, and this proves it. That's not the case. This is a bad bill, and I encourage the members of the committee to vote no.
The Chair would just note that we tend to not delve into the motives of the patrons on either side when they offer legislation for our consideration. But I know the patron very well, not only professionally but as a friend, and I am quite certain that he is not interested in entrapping anyone. Delegate Lopez.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick comment with regard to the assertion that somehow online training, because it's used at university levels, which is a really good use, is the same as, it should be the same kind of level for what we're doing with the concealed carry permit. The fact that you are at a university taking an online course on the sonnets of Shakespeare, that's a good use of online training. But doing an online training for a concealed carry permit where you actually never touch a firearm makes absolutely no sense. And it's apples and oranges.
The Chair would simply ask the question of the gentleman. Has he ever taken an online course for this area?
In which area?
In the concealed handgun.
No, but I have actually seen the questions, and it's sort of laughable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, I'll defer any further comments on that. Okay, any other comments from the committee that are germane to the piece of legislation? Delegate Welker.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say that I voted for this legislation last year, and I'm going to vote for this legislation again, simply because in areas around the Commonwealth, you have instances where, at least in most of these violent cases, it is the perpetrator or the person who the protection order is served against that commits the crime. In this particular instance, with this particular bill, you are giving somebody an opportunity to learn how to handle a firearm and protect themselves better than a piece of paper or a 5-minute away sheriff's deputy or state patrol. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion to report and refer the bill to appropriations committee. Will vote. Have all the members voted? Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports and refer 11 to 7. Delegate Wright.
Mr. Chairman, the next bill, 2308, is a bill that I patron. It simply adds conservation officers retired from the Department of Conservation and Recreation to the list of retired and persons eligible to carry a concealed handgun without a permit. The subcommittee recommended reporting 5-0, and I so move.
Okay, there's a motion to report the bill. Is there a second? Okay, are there proponents of the bill who would like to speak? Are there opponents of the bill who would like to speak? Anyone on the committee would like to address the bill? Okay, hearing none, the committee will vote. Okay, the clerk will close the roll. Bill reports 14-4. Right.
Mr. Chairman, the next bill is House Bill 2325, and we do have a substitute.
Okay, is the substitute distributed? Okay, is there a motion on the substitute?
I move the substitute.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor of substitute, say aye. Aye. Substitute is before us.
Mr. Chairman, the substitute provides that the photo identification must be valid and issued by a governmental agency of the Commonwealth or by the U.S. Department of Defense or U.S. State Department, which would include a passport, and strikes the requirement that a concealed handgun permit be notarized.
Okay, so everybody understand the bill? Are there proponents of the bill who would like to speak? Are there opponents of the bill? Anyone like to speak on the committee of the bill? Mr. Chairman, get signed.
I have a question. Does this, by taking away the oath, and this is maybe a court's question, but by taking away the oath requirement, I think when we did that with the ethics bill, you know, so we could electronically file our statements of economic interest, when we took away the notary and the oath, it lessened the penalty for making a false statement. So I think we had to explicitly making a false statement something else. So does this change at all the penalty for making false statements on the
That is
application?
actually not my understanding. I actually had this bill drafted, and I requested the patron include in the bill the removal of the notary requirement. I had actually spoken to some clerks. The form that the state police develops for this process can indicate on there, like many things that we sign, that if you falsely submit this, like your taxes, you're subject to the law and can be duly punished. Removing the notary requirement does not lessen that at all. It simply makes sure that the state police puts the notice on the form so that, when you box check it, that everything here is true. So, I would suggest to you it's ministerial in nature and does not affect the law. I would yield the attorneys to my right. Is that correct? Am I correct, counsel? Did I pass the bar on that?
Mr. Chair, it's in subsection C that the making of a materially false statement in the application under this article shall constitute perjury. So because of that language, the oath is not an issue.
State police, you can just give us a hand wave if you want. Your form will reflect that. Yes, okay, so state police acknowledges their form will reflect that. Okay, so we have a motion to report the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Substitute, yes, Delegate Ferris.
I would like to thank you for helping me with this bill and getting it right, and I'd also like to note, Mr. Chairman, for the committee and the audience, that Mr. Goddard is in favor of legislation that you and I have worked on.
I consider Mr. Goddard a friend, and I don't want to put him on the spot or cause him unnecessary embarrassment, but you support it. The record show that Mr. Goddard supports the bill, and this could be the kumbaya moment of the day, I would assume. Okay, we have a motion to report the bill, the substitute of the bill. The committee will vote. entire subcommittee process and full committee, but at the same time, I want to make sure that proponents and opponents have an opportunity to be heard as appropriate, and we will always have a robust and hopefully respectful debate as we go forward on these issues. I think that's appropriate and a good thing to do, and an example as to how things should be done in the future. Now, we'll make this point, our next meeting will be in House Room 1 at 8:30. Right? 8:30. At 8:30 next Friday in House Room 1 in the Capitol. We will not be meeting in here, so if you come in here and the room is empty, and it's Friday morning and you're thinking about going home to see your families, and you say, gosh, am I the only person who came to the committee? If you're in this room, you're the only person who came to the committee today. We'll be in the other door. So, okay, with that, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?